Hi everyone, welcome to today's lesson. We're going to be doing another focus on a particular part of portraiture today. So we'll be looking at hair. So we're looking at how we draw hair. I've got 3 references that I'll put up as I'm working, different types of hair, but the general approach will be the same. So like most of the things that we draw, it's going to be looking at making a kind of general block in using a differentiation of light and dark before adding a little bit of texture and detail. And the main thing I want to get across is how you don't necessarily need to kind of draw every strand when you're drawing hair, because that's something that people tend to do a lot. You just need to give a general impression, and it's better to do that through masses rather than through lines. So let's get started. So I'm going to start with this top picture first. I'm not going to be drawing the whole head, I'm just going to be blocking in the hair. So as that's what we're looking at. So I'm just generally thinking about where the hair is. Obviously we're going to get a little bit of the head as a negative shape. So all I've done is just go through and block that in as a general shape. So that's roughly the outline. I mean, it might shift slightly in a few different ways, but for the most part, that's what we're after. So got a general, quite blocky outline. It's actually quite helpful, even though hair's kind of like typically quite a rounded thing, to look for high points and low points and block it in a fairly straight line fashion initially. So from there, we can put a pretty general light tone over. So even the lightest part of the hair is darker than some other highlights in the drawing, so we know that it's all going to go moderately dark. So we could do this, say we're working on the rest of the drawing at the same time, we could do this fairly early on just to separate out the hair from the head. Now the next thing we want to do is look for masses of shadows. So we'll do the same thing, initially just using fairly sort of straight line block in. You can see I've isolated this little shadow is kind of like a shadow within what will be the general lights. So bearing in mind that this tone we put down is not a shadow, but it was just a kind of general lightest tone for the hair to give us something to work from. So at the moment I'm looking for this, you can see the shadow that I'm working along the lines of. Something like that. And reaching out this way. Dropping down. So I've now blocked in extra shapes for the darker parts of the hair. So I'm just going to simply darken those shapes pretty quickly and loosely, and use all the same tone. So now the hair has some form. I can maybe go a tad darker around what would be the bedbug lines. So you're going to get a little bit of reflected light bouncing back. Now as I'm doing this, you see I'm not too fussy about the edges of these lines, because hair's typically not particularly straight edged. So you can add quite a bit of kind of texture as you're drawing. So you can see that's starting to emerge reasonably nicely. So from there, just like if we were working with a more solid form, I can then start to add some halftones, so the back of the head here, it's a little bit darker than the front hair. Just turning out of the shadow a bit. There, it's starting to develop a fairly nice form. So from that point, I can then go through and start to add. So we've got a general shape blocked in. Now what we want to look for are kind of some more specific changes around the outside of the hair. And this is where we can start to get a little bit more detailed, not necessarily at any point drawing specific strands, but just being a little bit looser with our texture at the edge. For sort of flyaway hairs and so on. And that kind of softening takes place all around the hair. If we're thinking about the background behind, we might kind of look for lost and found edges. We can look for some of these transitions out of the shadows into the light. But you can see I'm always kind of thinking about it in a massed sense rather than thinking about the lines that all the individual strands and lines that would make up this hair. If I do that, it just becomes unmanageable. Particularly for sketching, but even for more finished work, you typically won't see rendering out of every possible strand in someone's hair. Just working with block shapes and kind of slowly building up texture that way. So you can see not too badly blocked in that hair. And that's pretty much all we're looking for, this sort of sketching. So you could start to build more detail, more and more detail into something like this. But in general, something like that's good. You can keep working over darkening values. This could go darker and darker, I think, in certain places. But you want to do that gradually so you can kind of add the darkness as a general sort of build up rather than making it too heavy immediately. But yeah, something like that's pretty good. So moving into our next hair now, we'll go with this guy's hair on the bottom right. This is a lot more close cropped, but still I'm going to just use straight lines to sort of take it apart, figure out what's going on. That's the general shape of it blocked in. Get rid of some of those extra lines. So again, we'll put a light tone over. We might erase back into this. There are some kind of shinier highlights on this guy's hair. But we'll start with this general form. Then can use these kind of creases within the hair, so we can start to give, using shadows blocked in this way, around the back side. So the back side of the hair goes quite dark as well. Combine that with this shadow. You can see that's starting to roughly match the hair that we're looking at, but I'm still just using these large blockier shapes. So certain points where it goes darker, and we can start to add a little bit more kind of detail to the outside shape of the head, so over that kind of blocked in. And start adding some finer clumps to the hair. This guy's also got a little bit of a kind of directional change, so we can add that in down here. Where the hair meets the head is usually a slightly kind of broken line, so it's not a flat shape. It kind of cuts in and out because of the way that hair grows, so you want to make sure you capture that, or a good sense of that. So I'm just developing the form there, not really adding any lines, just looking at where the lightest general part of that head is. And within that, so if we do this, add a few more kind of notches of darkness. Try to avoid going too detailed with it though. So I'm trying to look at how best to kind of really simply do this sort of stuff. Something like that's not too bad. And then add these highlights in. So I'm just erasing back into that general tone. You can see the highlights really lift it, and immediately start to get a pretty good feel for the texture of that hair. So you can see how that one works, and we've got one more to work on. So each of these has been about 7 minutes, so it's not taken long to block them in. So the final one is a fairly simple kind of egg-like shape, but even though it's an egg-like shape, I still want to sketch it in a kind of blockier manner, just because it's always easier to, even with rounded shapes, it's always easier to control them when they're blocky. So I've got this ribbon that I don't want to focus on too much, but I have to block in to a certain extent because it's holding the hair together. And then we've got the bottom part of the ponytail sort of dropping down here and raking across a little bit, and then another cut there. So that's our kind of general shape of the hair, roughly blocked in. With this one, it's sort of bunched. So with hair, you're kind of looking for how's it falling, where's it bunching. So this one has quite a bit of bunching. just there. Got that. These shadows down here as well. And then we've also got this kind of darker section reaching down. From the top. So that gives us our platform again, so that's our starting point. So using those shapes, go a little bit darker at the top again. But also we want to start developing the general form. So we've got this kind of general wave where it goes a bit lighter in the center and then darker down. Not looking at all at lines, just looking at forms. So different shapes that cut into the hair. The general sort of fall of masses within the hair. So we now go back in, it's kind of getting there, this one. Maybe add just a general tone over. So I've got some space to erase highlights into, some value to erase highlights into. So let's make all of this slightly generally darker. And then let's try some highlights. So just sort of running up the hair. There you can see that starts to come out pretty well, that hair. Maybe not quite as clear as the others in that space of time, but you'll find certain different types of hair more or less complex. But you can see it roughly starts to come together at this point. But yeah, that's pretty much it for today's lesson. So just looking at kind of three fairly different styles of hair, how to approach them, but the approach is roughly always the same, and it's the same as pretty much everything we do, where we're looking for an overall shape and then breaking that down into shadows, and then using the shadows as a platform to start to model. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Hopefully it's useful for your portraiture and your figure work, and I'll see you guys soon.